I'd like to introduce Louise Smyth, who's the Chief Executive of Companies House and the Registrar for England and Wales. She joined Companies House in 2017, coming from the Intellectual Property Office as their Chief Operating Officer. Joining at a huge time of change, Louise. You joined whilst Brexit was happening. You joined where there was a lot of noise about this legislation and the issues that people were talking about with the data at Companies House. And then COVID hit. So how's it been?
Challenging, I think, is the answer. Somebody said to me recently, you wouldn't do all this at once. And I said, I don't think I've got any choice. So, you know, it has been a challenging time. If I just talk briefly about joining Companies House, and then I'll move on perhaps to cover Brexit and COVID. Companies House Chief Exec is a job that I've wanted for a long time, so I was really pleased that it came up at a time when I thought I had the skills and experience to get it, and I did, so that was great, first step. Before I joined, somebody said to me, you know, Intellectual Property Office is like a small town, Companies House is like a village, and that is really the case. So it's a wonderful organisation to be able to lead, and I think the thing that characterises it is kindness, community, and a real dedication to customer service. So people are really committed to their jobs and what they do. But on the flip side to that, you know, our systems are kind of first generation digital systems. They're certainly, I don't think, up to scratch for the modern day. Internally, we've got a huge amount of legacy, of workarounds, of things that make people's ability to do their job difficult. And we also had a culture that was, in a very benevolent way, very hierarchical and command and control. So we weren't accessing the creativity and the brilliance of the people in Companies House and their ideas of how we can improve. So it was clear there was a huge transformation task that needed to be done in order to make us kind of fit for the modern day, but also fit for the future. But then on the other side of that, we were getting criticised for, you know, the fact that people were able to use the company's registration and account system for wrongdoing, the money laundering. And so I was really pleased when the consultation went out, and now about the government response, because actually that gives us a real focus for our transformation. And you know, we'll be able to do some of the things that people have criticised us for not doing. So for querying information that we can see isn't right, and doing more investigation, having more analytical skills, and being able to kind of really work closely with law enforcement and other government organisations to be able to really make sure that the company's register is delivering maximum value for the economy.
When you mention maximum value, so how big is that value to the economy, really?
Well, we did a bit of research last year that showed that it was up to £3 billion per year. You know, obviously a lot of people rely on the data that we've got to make millions and billions of business. Somebody said trillions to me. I don't quite know the number, but there's a lot of business decisions that are being made out there based largely on our data. And so obviously the more accurate it can be, the more confidence that people can have in that data. You know, it was accessed 9 billion times last year, and that is growing. Every time I see the figure, it's grown a bit more. So, you know, people are really kind of using that data to make their decisions. So the better the data, the better the decisions.
So if we're looking at people accessing it about, the last figure I looked at was 9.8 billion. So people are accessing that 9.8 billion times in a year. And if the estimated value of that information is 3 million, you've just mentioned it needs to be accurate information that people are relying on. Now, when you read the consultation response, and I'll mention to people who are watching here as well that we'll send out links to these documents. If anybody wants any bedtime reading, it's quite a fair amount there. But we'll send out links to the consultation response and also the strategy documents so people can read that themselves if they haven't already. They both make reference that the framework that Companies House operates in hasn't changed a lot since 1840. So we're talking more than 150-year-old framework in a modern age. So it's not an easy task to undertake. What are some of the challenges you're going to be facing there?
Our line we use, and it's become almost like we're going to say it again, this is the most fundamental change to company law since 1844. So it's quite an exciting thing for me to be overseeing. And I think it will be challenging for a number of reasons. We need to get the balance right because we don't want to go too far the other way, so that we're kind of a barrier to ease of doing business and the ease of starting a company, because that continues to be really important and, you know, is another enabler for giving confidence in the UK economy that people can quite easily set up a business. So we need to be really careful that we balance kind of the new requirements that we put on companies, but we don't kind of go too far the other way and it just becomes really difficult. We need to make sure that the solutions that we come up with, for example, for director of PSC verification, are digital. The last thing I want is for people to be turning up at Companies House with their passports. That for me is like, no. You know, we need to have a really good, proportionate, easy to use digital solution to it. And actually kind of verification is something that is often struggled with. So we're looking at that already and, you know, just working through how we're going to run that. But also, and I'll keep going back to the people, because people are really important to me. And I think it's the people where the magic happens. All the other things are things that we do. But if we get the people with the right skills and the right attitudes and the right behaviours, I think we can achieve anything. And so that kind of skills piece, I mean, it's a very different thing that we're being asked to do. Whereas largely now we're processing and, you know, as you say, accepting information in good faith. That kind of querying, investigation, getting into that kind of different kinds of activity will require different skills and will kind of change the culture of Companies House. So we need to make sure that we invest in our people. We probably will need to recruit new people as well, because, you know, this is a very particular skill set. Hopefully we can retrain some of the people as well. But in order to be able to get this right. And of course, there's as well, as soon as you get into querying and having more powers, you increase the risk. So we need to make sure that we've got really well thought through processes and approaches to this, so that we're not doing things that could kind of scupper companies or restrict their ability to operate unnecessarily. So it all has to be proportionate.
We've seen in situations, in fact, it was mentioned in government by a couple of MPs whilst this was being debated. I wish I could remember who it was who said it, but she commented that it's more difficult to open up a gym membership than it is to open up a company at the moment. But a company is a vehicle that can do so much good, but also so much damage, as we talk about laundering. So I would probably comment that I don't think additional ID checks or some of the diligence being done would hinder too many, because it's already happening with half the industry, half the number of companies being set up. We're also talking about appointments of directors or issuing of shares to people becoming controlling entities or controlling persons within a business, so PSCs. And you touched on it there. One of the biggest changes, and one that a lot of people are interested in, is verifying who is behind a company. And that covers broad range from, say, the directors to the major shareholders, but also those setting up companies as well, who may be the beneficial owners. I mentioned earlier that the private sector is governed by the money laundering directive and the duties that they do there. And in the consultation, it mentions that Companies House won't be covered under the money laundering regulations, but will operate to an equivalent standard. How are you interpreting that? When we talk about the standards that Companies House will operate to, has there been any sort of conversation around sort of the levels there? Is it directly relating to the fourth money laundering directive, or?
Yeah, well, Companies House, we have a statutory responsibility to register companies, and so we won't be subject to the anti-money laundering regulations. Sorry, losing my words there. But we will be looking at introducing multi-factor verification, ID verification, which will achieve the aim of giving us confidence that we know who we're dealing with, and that person is the same person who set up the account with us.
And what people would be checked? So we're talking both people coming on to a company and those who are either after a company's been registered or during it. What would be the checklist to be registered?
It will cover directors and PSCs, people of significant control.
Yeah. And I note that although there was a debate or conversation within the government's response talking about shareholders, the choice was made not to carry out ID checks on shareholders. Do you know why they sort of opted to not cover shareholders?
Yeah, I think shareholders is quite a difficult one, and we did talk about it quite a lot. And I think it's the people who have significant influence over companies that it's important for us to verify. And particularly when you look at some of the big PSCs or larger companies, you might have shareholders, some of them have got thousands and thousands of shareholders who actually aren't in that influential position. So again, it's a proportionate response.
Yeah. And what about the people who are forming companies on behalf of somebody else? And I know this covers a whole range of areas. So if we pick a scenario where I may go on to the gov.uk website to register a company, but I'm registering the company for my wife. So I'm not on the company. How are we covering that? I'm familiar that Companies House would consider that a presenter. Is that be correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So presenters, well, you're getting a bit technical for me now, Richard.
Sorry.
Company formation agents. Can we deal with them?
Okay, we'll cover formation agents.
Company formation agents, are required to kind of operate within the anti-money laundering regulations and to those standards. So us doing checks will not relieve them of their obligations under that regulation. So they will still need to do the checks that are required of them now.
Okay. I read within the government's response that Companies House would need to do some verification and sort of checks on presenters first for them to be a presenter. So if I was setting up as a company formation agent myself now, what would I need to supply Companies House, or what checks would you do on me before I was allowed to become a presenter?
Again, I don't know the detail of that, but basically, all the presenters are covered by regulatory bodies, who supervising bodies who will ensure that they meet the standards. We'll be developing closer relationships and more feedback loops with those supervising bodies, so that if we have any doubt over whether a particular agent is performing the checks adequately, And, you know, I think there probably are different standards that people are operating to. Then we will be looking through a strengthened relationship with those regulatory bodies for them to be kind of more effective in their supervisory responsibilities.
So if I check on that, so taking company information agents, they're regulated by HMRC.
Yeah.
We're looking at HMRC strengthening their due diligence on their, I don't know what you call it, members, the regulated members, and then Companies House would be relying on HMRC having done that to then issue the presenter IDs.
Yeah, and of course, kind of the detail of a lot of this is being worked out now, which is why I don't know, kind of, I haven't got the nail down how all this is going to operate. You know, we've just had the government response, and between now and when, you know, we're having to form legislation to develop kind of the bills that will go through Parliament, and that will be all part of the thinking, as well as how we can operationalise it. So no, we're in a lucky position really, in that we're kind of in on the policy development, and largely we're an operational delivery organisation. So we're able to kind of make sure that what's developed in the legislation we can operate.
Yeah. So you may not sort of know on this, but one of the things which I think would be interesting to that industry, reading through the government's response, is that it does imply that people who are forming companies on behalf of their clients now may not be able to continue once all these changes roll out if they cannot demonstrate their level of due diligence to the relevant regulator. So when we're looking at the private sector, what the government's referring to there is a lot of cleaning up of that industry for any that are maybe setting up companies on behalf of other people, but are doing it outside of being regulated. My interpretation of that is that there will probably be some more stringent sort of policing of that from HMRC. Do you feel that would be fair to say?
I definitely think that they will be looking at what people are doing, because in a way there's no point, is there, in us in making all these changes and introducing things if then we're not kind of holding people to account for the things that they should be doing. So yeah.
I know from a software development perspective, so what we've developed and work with Companies House is there'll be a requirement for us to provide information about the presenter, more information about the presenter being sent through to Companies House with filings and those sort of documentation being, whatever's sent through, whether it's an appointment of a director, whether it's registering of a company. So I can see some of that coming together, but there's some of that to be ironed out, as you just mentioned, within legislation. And I imagine that will also affect, as we sort of branch out, we sort of go beyond the UK to other countries. There's a lot of presenters around the world, and the consultation, I'm not asking you to answer this one.
Which countries?
But when you read between the lines of what the government has put out, they allude to sort of some countries may not be able to have presenters within them, and some will, and that will be down to the framework in which they operate. And it'd be interesting to see as that develops, which countries have the relevant regulatory frameworks that will satisfy the government and which ones won't. And I imagine that's going to be one of sort of the early things to work through in maybe year 1, year 2 of the strategy as that's being rolled out.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't change as quickly as the countries that are on the travel corridors.
No, hopefully not. Hopefully it'll be fairly static. You've jumped ahead of one of my next questions, but we'll cover on it. So this is one of the questions we were sent in by one of the formation agents that runs on our e-filing platform. And it really sort of bases around what sort of checks they would need to do if they're acting on behalf of one of their clients. And this is a scenario where somebody has got a company registered at Companies House already. And we'll use this example of a director. The director's already appointed. They've already had their ID checked by Companies House. Will that formation agent have to go through the due diligence and carry out ID checks again on that same person? I think I know the answer. In fact, I'm fairly confident I know the answer. But you
yeah, they will have to continue to do the checks that they need to do as part of their regulation, but we won't duplicate then. And so we need to work out how we're going to do that. So we won't be asking for double checking, but they will continue to have to do what they need to do as part of their due diligence. Is that the answer you thought I'd say?
That's the answer I was expecting to say. I can probably go into sort of some more detail on the money laundering regs relating to this, about reliance and where one regulated entity can rely on another regulated entity. Companies House, as I've read through the paperwork, isn't going to be a regulated entity. But what that does enable you to do is, if a formation agent is setting up a company for somebody for the first time and they carry out that due diligence, you're not then going to contact that person as they're being added onto the company and that company's being registered to ask them to verify their ID again. You're going to be relying on the regulation, HMRC's regulation of those formation agents to have done that check, and then that person's added onto the company. But because you won't be regulated, and there is no reliance there, getting into a small print of the money laundering regs here.
I was going to say, that's my bedtime reading.
Yeah. But this is quite important, and it sort of relates to financial institutions as well, because when we're thinking about banks, and if a bank is opening up a bank account for a new business, they will still need to carry out their own due diligence. At that point, they can't sort of bypass their obligations because Companies House says that they've ID checked these people. They will still be governed by their own regulations to do that. I think that's quite sort of a relevant, sort of important point. Which does move on to the next one, really, when we're thinking about the volume of data. There's quite a lot of information already at Companies House. A lot of directors are pointing. Now, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if you have that to hand, that'd be an interesting one. But there is going to be a requirement put on Companies House to sort of work through the backlog of information. So companies that are already on the register, directors and PSCs are already in place. You've got the task coming up to work through all those and carry out the ID check on all of them. I wouldn't welcome that task. It's going to be quite a big one. How are you planning on undertaking that one?
I did say this is a big challenge at the beginning. I mean, when I'm having my insomniac moments, I do count the number of directors and PSCs, not. There's millions. What we're thinking, so again, none of this is nailed down, but we're thinking that the confirmation statement is a useful point to kind of back capture the existing directors and PSCs who are on the register. People are used to doing the confirmation statement with us. For us, operationally, it's spread out across the year. So it enables us to put the resources into doing it. So that's our current thinking. But, we'll have to work that through. But it's a big job. But we'll try and make it as easy as possible.
When we're looking at, the confirmation statements, how they generally, a lot of people might be in the routine of just filing a nothing's changed scenario. Are you thinking that I've got another follow-up question to this, but at that point, when this comes into force, every confirmation statement will have to be a complete confirmation statement, complete listing and going through and IDing each of those individuals?
Again, we'll have to work it through, but it'll definitely involve that ID element of it. So, it will be a kind of more, we will be requiring more of companies to get our kind of the whole thing up to date and in the new way. But hopefully it's a one-hit thing. And so, and once we've done it, it's done, isn't it? And then we can move forward. This may all come out in the wash as we're sort of working through to done, but there's also filings if they're doing a change of directorship. So if a director moves house, for example,
I imagine maybe picking up on those sort of, if it's not, here's a little free one for you, but to picking up on those as well. But so we're looking at confirmation statement as the window of doing this, and we're looking at probably around about sort of a 15-month period to sort of get the whole lot up to date. That's going to be, if you think, say, companies that have like several directors or several PSCs and things, that's going to be quite an expensive job to undertake. I'm sort of jumping ahead here from my note, but presumably there's going to have to be some sort of cost recovery on this, which will affect the fees charged for confirmation statements, and perhaps even like appointing of directors as well. At the moment, you can add a director to a company for zero cost. But if you're adding a new director to a company, you're going to, Companies House is going to bear the cost of identifying that person who's being added on for a zero cost form.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an interesting one. I mean, we operate on cost recovery through the fees, but I think it will depend, you have to look at this on quite a longer term thing, by investing in transformation of our systems, by streamlining what we do alongside this. I mean, hopefully the efficiencies that we achieve through other transformation activity would offset the investment that we need to do in this. So my gut is it'll probably work out about the same, or there may be small increases. I'm not anticipating that kind of the cost of registering a company, of dealing with us, will increase significantly. And I mean, we have some of the lowest fees in the world, so I don't think it's going to make a huge impact.
Well, I can refer back to, we did, as part of Robust, we did a YouGov poll across a load of, I can't remember the volume, it's thousands of businesses. And there was quite an overwhelming response that businesses were prepared to pay a bit more for their filings at Companies House if it contributed to the integrity of the data and combated the fraud that potentially was existing throughout there. So there is scope for Companies House to raise its fees with the support of business based on that survey that we did.
That chimes with the feedback that I have, that those fees are very low, and so we do a fees review on a annual basis, looking at the cost of our services and kind of thinking about whether we need to adjust. So we would keep an eye on it, and basically that's just how we operate on a cost recovery.
Yeah.
Sorry,
my feed.
That's
right. Yeah, my feedback to that is maybe looking at some of the free forms. Hopefully, not making myself too unpopular to businesses, but because because quite literally they're free. There's no cost recovery on that form being filed at the moment, but I can see there being a cost to verify identity, which we know is going to be easily within a few pounds, possibly, depending on if you're going to need document verification as well, or people turning up at Companies House with passports. They're going to have fees associated. Not going to happen. No. I mean, touching on that subject, presumably, I'm making an assumption here that if the identification cannot be done fully autonomously or through electronic methods, then Companies House would be looking to the private sector to sort of help those people to sort of see through there, whether that is an accountant doing that, whether it's a formation agent doing that, whatever it might be, rather than having people turn up at Companies House with passports.
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to, our aim is always to get as close to 100% digital as we can. But obviously there are accessibility cases where people just, for whatever reason, can't operate within a digital environment. And then there will be ones, and perhaps some of the overseas ones that you mentioned earlier would fall in this category, where we'll have to look at other ways for them to be verified. But I still don't want them coming with their passports.
No, it'll be quite long queues, especially with social distancing.
Yeah.
Whilst on the subject of money, I'm aware of this from conversations that I had with some of your colleagues. Accounts. You receive a lot of accounts being filed at Companies House every year, and I know from the stats that it's had the lowest take-up of digital adoption above anything else. But when you're looking at what we're trying to sort of affect here with the reforms and the checks and the verification that's happening, financial data is one of those key pieces of information, yet so much of it is still being filed by paper. Before we come on to that, I think it's interesting to share, if you can, where some work that Companies House did with HMRC as a bit of a spot check on sort of sharing information.
Yeah, I can do. So I should start with the account. So for all that, I don't know how many people are listening to this call, but we're on, to scare me, we're on 88% of accounts are filed digitally. It is one of our lower areas. In general, we have good take up of our digital services. And my plea would be, stop sending us the paper. We don't want it. And actually, it's in general the larger companies that are continuing to file on paper. And we actually do have some that laugh at us when we say, please will you file with us digitally? And they say, well, we're just not going to do it till you make us. For our data and the register to be delivering the maximum value, we need the information to be there digitally and hopefully appropriately tagged, so that people can really get the value out of it. And my second point is save the planet. Think of all those trees. Even with an 88% take up, which is quite good, when you think we've got 4.3 million companies, or might be even more, on the register, I think it's actually 4.6, then, that tail of 12% represents a significant amount of paper, and you should see my post room, it's huge. So big plug for digital. On the HMRC pilot, we did a pilot with HMRC where we compared the information that people were submitting to them with the information that they were submitting to us. And it was a really successful pilot where we identified, and I'm going to say fraud and error, because it's not all fraud, but of £14.6 million, which is a lot of money. And when we looked at extrapolating that, so we moved from pilot stage to, just doing it, there's potential there for identifying 100 million a year. So, and that's a really good example of the kind of work that we will be able to do in the new world with data sharing agreements and, doing much more analysis, working with other government departments to see how we can, make sure that people aren't gaming the system or making a mistake, of course. Yeah. But, so I think that was a really promising pilot that we did there.
Yeah, I think some people would may be surprised that HMRC and Companies House with this sort of sharing information wasn't already happening, but it's true it wasn't. But part of the changes and part of the what the government has directed Companies House to do now is to build, to cement those links to share information more. Well, just to share information, not share more, just to share it. And that was I found that quite an interesting project. But one of the thoughts, another sort of bit of software feedback for you. I would perhaps have a hunch that the adoption of filing paper accounts for particularly some of the larger companies, which are driven very much by some of the larger accounting firms, I'd imagine, if the software allowed the accountancy firm to put their information on the cover sheet as they're filing the account, I may be just sort of plucking at straws there, but that might help some of the adoption for accounts filing electronically, because I know all the software companies and all the major accounting software companies support it. It's just like some people like a big bundle of paper. for some reason.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you've mentioned this to me before, and I did check on it afterwards, and apparently they can now, but I haven't gone in and tried to do it, so it may be that it's a bit clunky. You know, so it's something we can definitely look and see if we can improve. But, you know, it would make a huge difference to us. And, you know, in our shareholder sessions with the accountancy profession, we do bang on about it a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know just from other conferences, we don't work in the accountants sort of account filing space ourselves as a platform. But I've heard and I know that it's one of the bigger challenges that Companies House has is getting that adoption by accountants primarily to file electronically. So, and it helps with what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
One of the closing statements in both your strategy and the government's response talks about this, and you've mentioned it already throughout, it's such a fundamental change. One of the big changes that slipped under my radar, and I didn't see it happen this year, but that Companies House is no longer its own trading fund and has become centrally government funded. I don't fully understand the implications of that, but when I first saw it, it did concern me a little bit as to what does this mean to Companies House? What is it going to mean for implementing any of this? How does it going to change how Companies House in recent years has been able to be quite dynamic and sort of investing in technology? Can you alleviate my concerns or give us a sort of run through sort of what impact this does mean for Companies House as an entity?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what it means is that as part of, like, government departments, as part of the spending review, we have to bid for money to cover what we want to do. And so we put our bid in now, and that's going through the process for the next year. It probably puts an extra layer into, whereas before we were funding it ourselves. Now we have to kind of go and make the case for it. We were already subject to quite a few different governance mechanisms to get approvals in order to be able to do what we wanted to do. So, you know, we have to present our business case, and, you know, we have to go through challenge sessions. We have to work with GDS and the Government Digital Service to get their approvals that the things we want to do are going in the right direction for how they want to take government digital. So it is an extra dimension to it. But to be honest, I mean, we've got a lot of government support for what we're trying to do. You know, there's a lot of interest. I think there's cross-party support for the changes that we want to make. And, you know, if I'm frank, if we don't get the money, we can't do it. So, you know, it's just something that we have to go through. And as civil servants, we're used to operating in these, you know, kind of, it's just public money. So it needs to have the checks and balances to make sure that we're spending it well. So, so a bit of extra, but I don't think it's going to stop us delivering what we need to do.
So, okay, so that kind of, you started to allude on that really, but one of the questions that came in was, is the funding available to deliver all this? I think anybody can see this is going to have quite a huge, significant cost in infrastructure and people as an organisation over the next 5 years, when you look at what has to be done. So is that funding already ring-fenced there and it's ready to go for the next 5 years?
Well, we've kind of applied for it and we've made the case. It's currently Secretary of State's in discussions with Treasury. You know, it's the normal way this works. We think I'm not sure. You know, it depends whether it's a 3-year spending review or a 1 year, because obviously, you know, the commitments you know, roll over from year to year, and we'll. But I think there is the support for what we need to do. So it's not something it's not the thing that I'm worrying about at the moment.
Okay. Asking a somewhat political question, which you may not be able to answer, but do you think this would be influenced if there was a change in government throughout that period of time?
All the indications from, where we've gone through the various elements of the consultation and the consultation response are that there is cross-party support for this. So, but obviously, we're public servants. We have to do what the government of the day wants us to do. We're there. Oh, sorry, sounds like I don't want to, but we're there to serve the government of the day. But I think there is a general support for the changes that we need to make. And so
I would be
really
very shocked if it wasn't because, as you could imagine, during sort of 2017, 18, 19, whilst with myself and say Transparency International Global, which was doing our sort of lobbying to government, all the support was from the opposition and other parties. So if any of them got in power through whatever method, I would be very surprised if they went back on their commitments of support. So I'd like to think it would be delivered by then if there was a change.
I'm very hopeful and very optimistic and, and excited about the new world we're moving into.
No, and I mean, I can sort of speak for myself. I know that we as Business Data Group have been sort of giving some sort of input and support to some of the digital teams within Companies House on how, ways and best practices and things of how to implement some of these changes. So I know that the team there are already making inroads and doing work on this going forward. So
and we're grateful for your continued engagement because it's great.
You're very welcome. We've overrun by a minute or a couple of minutes, but I would love you've mentioned a couple of times, if you're okay for a couple of minutes, that talking about the team, and I'd just like to touch on really that I've seen a lot coming out of social media in recent months, particularly around sort of support initiatives that Companies House has been doing around the team. And I just think that's, it's a really positive thing to do. And I know I've seen really positive changes in the dynamic within Companies House and the people there. And if you'd like to, I'd love to for you to share some of these incentives that have been running, schemes that have been running, and sort of what they mean for the people at Companies House.
Yeah, well, as I said to you, I mean, for me, the people and culture elements are the thing that is going to make this a success. And so Companies House, actually, the thing that has struck me, particularly during since March, when we've been in lockdown at various stages and all dispersed, I thought that perhaps that magic atmosphere might be lost. But what's happened is our networks have just exploded. And that's not a top-down thing. That's people coming together with shared interests, whether it's the Cancer Support Network, the Hearing Loss Network, numerous diversity networks, carers, and what they've done. And these are self-started from within the organisation. So we've got over 50% of people now within the organisation who are part of a network. And they're all there supporting each other, sharing common interest problems. And, it has been a miracle to see that kind of real strong commitment to maintaining our culture through some difficult times. And I was really pleased that just recently we were awarded our Investors in People Platinum status, which very few organisations get. And for a government agency to get it, well, we haven't got perhaps the resources that some of the large private sector companies have got, has been a real testament to the fantastic people who are working at Companies House, but also the culture that we're trying to create. So I'm really pleased with that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it.
No, it's something I've enjoyed reading that's been coming out across Companies House social media, and it's a value I share personally, that people are so important to an organisation. And if I may, I think it's a credit to yourself for how sort of leading and the way that you lead, that empowers and gives the people within the team the confidence and the initiative to go and do that. So that's, I thought it's worth sharing.
Thank you.
The apologies to people watching that we've overrun for a bit, but what I'd like to do is thank you, Louise, for your time today. It's been great speaking with you and for sharing with us sort of what you're doing within the Companies House and what's happening around this, if I get the word, the corporate transparency and reform consultation and your 2025 strategy. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody, a stakeholder and interest in this coming together. Wish you every success of implementing it, and that the funding comes through with each stage.